Rose Sandecki, 12th Evacuation Hospital, Kuchi, October 1968 to March 1969. 95th Evacuation Hospital, Da Nang, March 1969 to October 1969. In 1979, the Veterans Administration established 90 outreach centers across the country providing readjustment, counseling, and other services for Vietnam-era veterans. An early motto, help without hassles, perfectly describes the tone of the centers, a place without all the bureaucracy and red tape of the VA, staffed by professionals, a majority of whom are Vietnam veterans themselves. The success of the center is now being fully realized, with the number having grown to 136 in 1984. In September of 1981, Rose Sandecki was appointed as team leader, director of one of the centers. Besides the regular duties in this position, she has been an outspoken advocate for women's veterans' needs, both in and out of the system. My Uncle Frank had been in the Marines during World War II, an uncle that I was very close to. My mother's youngest brother. When he came back from the Marines at age 36, he went into Franciscan seminary to become a priest. Come back from Iwo Jima, a changed man. He went through a severe depression, and as a result, couldn't finish the seminary. He then lived in my grandmother's house, and when I was a freshman in high school, my uncle took a gun and killed himself. He died because of changes in his behavior brought on by the war. I guess you could call it PTSD from World War II, and it was a classic case of it. That is probably one of the reasons I'm doing this kind of work now, because of my personal feelings about what happened in my family as a result of the war. I'm not gonna blow my nose because I just don't care enough. I was feeling somewhat restless in Buffalo. I had been in nursing about 7 years, have graduated from a 3-year nursing school, and then gone back to school to get my BS in nursing. I had a couple of job opportunities, but none of them were that exciting to me. This was in the spring of 1968, and the war was really building up. I remember watching the news every night, seeing in full glorious color the stretchers with the guys on them, really torn up, coming off the dust-offs. I felt I had some talent as a registered nurse, a professional nurse, and probably could offer something to those young men over there. Going into the military was not my first choice. I wanted to go over as a civilian. Check out agencies like AID and Tom Dooley's medical organization, and every one of those was a 2-year contract, and it was working strictly with Vietnamese. That was not why I wanted to go to Vietnam. I went down to Navy recruiter and I was told I was too old. I was 26 or 27. The Air Force told me I would have to spend at least 1 year in the States before they would train me as a flight nurse to go over to Vietnam. I said I want to go as soon as I can. Well, I feel like it. Well, I've got the spirit that has moved me. Only the Army would guarantee that I could be over within a certain period of time. So much so that they had the recruiter on the phone from Buffalo to Washington, D.C., telling me to talk to the individuals there with a guarantee that I would be in Vietnam within 3 months. And that did happen, indeed. I went to the 12th Evacuation Hospital at Kuchi. My first job was a head nurse, surgical intensive care unit, recovery room. I was a captain because I had 7 years experience in nursing and a bachelor's degree when I joined the Army. And in days of war, they gave rank out like candy. I had very little experience in recovery and no experience in surgical intensive care units. I graduated from nursing school in 1960 when ICUs weren't around. They were just starting to be thought about. When I was told my assignment would be head nurse of this ward, I said, no, I don't want to do that. Because I'd never set foot in an ICU. I quickly learned you never say no in the Army. I had this job whether I wanted it or not. I couldn't believe the numbers of people coming in, the numbers of beds and the kinds of injuries that I saw in front of me. I really wasn't prepared for that. This was in October of 1968, and it was what they called post-Tet, after the Tet offensive, but it was extremely busy. As head nurse, my job was basically to see that all patients were taken care of as efficiently and quickly and in the best care possible. The medical corps motto was, and still is, I guess, preserve the fighting strength. The idea of working in military hospital is to patch up the soldier so he can go back to battle again. It was the whole theme of what was going on over there. It wouldn't be unusual when guys would come in with multiple frag wounds, be treated, go to surgery, and have the tissue around the injury described, and then be sent to Japan where they would do a DPC, delayed primary closure, of this open wound, and then send back to duty. As long as an individual didn't lose a leg, arm, or an eye, as long as they were walking, they would go back to the boonies. So my job as the head nurse was to make sure that the patients were taken care of, always helping. I mean, I didn't sit back behind a desk and order the junior nurses or corpsmen around. I was pitching in with the rest of them. When I look back on it, I was naive. When I walked through those doors, I learned a lot very quickly, seeing the types of casualties and the numbers of them. They were all so young. Seeing this on a daily basis, 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, I think that I became somewhat callous and bitter. You also learned that you became almost like a commodity because you were a woman. After working 12-hour shifts with all the blood and gore, you would change into a civilian dress to go to one of the local officers' clubs. We were chauffeured in helicopters with the guns on the side that would take 6 or 7 of us up to an officers' club. You couldn't sit still, you just have a drink and relax. There would be one guy after another coming up and more or less doing his number on you. I haven't seen a round eye in 6 months. Would you dance with me? You'd say, no, I'm tired. I just want to sit and put my feet up. They wouldn't take no for an answer and would play this guilt thing like, God, you don't know how bad I'm feeling. Just one dance, that's all. So you would dance and drink until 2 or 3 in the morning, then at 6 go back to the blood and guts of the war again. The initial 2 or 3 months was getting used to the pace of the 12 to 13 hours, and then the 3 or 4 hours of play. And it was a pressure kind of play, because if you didn't go to the officers' club, there was something wrong with you. If you stayed back in your hooch by yourself or stayed and talked to a couple of the other nurses, you were accused of being a lesbian. If you would be accused of having an affair with one of the doctors, you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. After a period of 4 or 5 months, I decided that I really didn't care what people said about me. If I chose not to go to these clubs and parties, I'm not doing it. And probably because I'm somewhat of a recluse. So there are some of the changes that I went through personally in Vietnam. The way of dealing with the sheer amount of patients, the long hours in the hospital, was by putting up a wall of the emotional numbing that we talk about. I think it built over a period of time. Each day I went in, and the more I saw, the thicker this wall became. It was sort of a skin protecting me from what was going on. Look at it from the point of view of a patient. How would you, as a patient, feel if you had this hysterical nurse that was crying and sobbing because there is someone in there that is badly maimed or is going to die? We had to be effective for the next people that were coming in. Nurses are trained to take care of other people, not look at their own feelings and what is going on with them. That is part of the medical profession. A story from Cu Chi, another example of a sort of rude awakening to my military naivete. I got a phone call on the ward from the chief nurse saying, "You've got a patient there that is going to get an award. Make sure that the bed has clean sheets, the area is straightened up, and the ward looks good." Which really turned me off to begin with. Let's clean up the ward because we've got VIPs coming in. Well, the VIP happened to be the general of the 25th Infantry Division, along with his aide and an entourage of about 12 people. And this patient, when he came through the recovery room the day before, he had remembered me. This was his second visit to us. He had been there 3 months before with frag wounds. He'd been sent back to the jungle and came back this time with both of his legs blown off. He was all about 20 years old when he was waking up from the anesthesia. He remembered me. He started kidding me about how I had made him cough and deep breathe so he wouldn't calm down with pneumonia. We were kidding around, and he said, "Don't you remember me, ma'am?" I said, "Oh yeah." But I really didn't, because there was just so many of them. The entourage was coming to give him an award because He happened to be number 20,000 to come through the 12th evacuation hospital in 1968. In 1968, there were 24 Army evac hospitals in Vietnam, and he was number 20,000 through one of 24 Army hospitals. We are not talking about the Air Force hospitals, the Navy, but 20,000 through one hospital. So for this distinction, the general comes in and gives him a watch. They have this little ceremony, give him a Purple Heart and the watch. I'm standing off in the corner watching all this, and as the general handed him the watch from the 25th Infantry Division as a token of our appreciation, the kid more or less flings the watch back at him and says something like, I can't accept this, sir. It's not going to help me walk. I couldn't really see the expression on the general's face, but they all left after this little incident. I went over and just put my arms around him and hugged him. And if I remember correctly, I started crying. And I think he was crying too. I really admired him for that. That was one time that I let the feelings down and let somebody see what I felt. I look a lot for him to do that. It took a lot for him to do that. And it sort of said that this war was all about. And it sort of said what this war was all about to me. 1968. Our chief nurse in Vietnam was a very warm, caring colonel in the Army Nurse Corps. Not too many of them around, but he was one. And when you came in country, she recommended that he work 6 months in a busy area and 6 months in a non-busy area for your own psychological welfare. I think it was an excellent suggestion. The 6 months in Cu Chi were extremely busy, extremely hard. Then I transferred up to Da Nang, which was still busy, with critical things going on, but not as hectic as Cu Chi. It wasn't an area that was quite as dangerous as Cu Chi was, and it had to make the comparison because the war was all around. But it seemed like when we were getting mortared and shelled in Da Nang, it didn't have the same impact as when we were mortared and shelled at Cu Chi. I remember once in Cu Chi, they got us all up in the middle of the night and were really not sure what to do with us because we were being overrun. That one was written up in Time magazine. Cu Chi was full of tunnels. There were Viet Cong underneath the whole city. We had hospitals underneath the city. Firing bases. It turned out our military stopped them, but they were very close. They had actually cut through the perimeter and were on the compound, the base camp. That was crazy. I've never been so scared. They gathered all of us in the kitchen of our hooch. We were told to stay there and wait for the word. I remember sitting around in the kitchen in our flak jackets and helmets just bullshitting all night long. There wasn't anything else you could do, and we just went to work the next morning at 6:30. When I was in Da Nang, the closeness of death came home to me when we heard that a nurse had been killed up in Chu Lai, Sharon Lane. I remember reading about it in the Stars and Stripes, and the reason it had an impact on me is that I was originally scheduled to be up at Chu Lai, and that could have been me. This was in August of 1969. I remember lying to my family when I would write home that the hospitals were real safe and not to worry. Because I had come to Da Nang as a captain with all the experience, they had made me head nurse in the emergency room. It was called emergency and admitting and pre-op. There you would get the casualties as soon as they came off the dust-offs. They're air ambulances. So you could do the life-saving measures to be done on the wounded, and you would be triage. Nurses would have to do triage because we only had so many doctors, and most of them ended up working on the operating room. Sometimes casualties couldn't even go to an x-ray. They were so bad that they would take them right into the OR. There were 3 or 4 operating rooms in Da Nang, and they were always busy. Because the docs were so busy in the operating rooms, the nurses in the emergency room had the job of doing the triage. You had to make the decision about those people who were wounded so bad that no matter how much time you would spend on them, they wouldn't live. They were called expectants, and you would have to put them in an area behind a screen to die, because these 19-year-old kids, you know, in try aging, there were three categories to sort out: the expectants, the immediates, those that required immediate attention and surgery. Then there was a third category, the walking wounded. The doctors who had worked in the emergency room were called GMOs, General Medical Officers, and those guys were usually interns or residents with very little experience. They were learning as they were doing, just as we were. This was an evacuation hospital, which was different than other hospitals, so I can only talk about how they functioned. When you get down to 100 days to go before you go home, you have a calendar that you fill in, a short timer's calendar, and you start getting a little bit crazy thinking about going home. Then there was also the other side of the coin, where I didn't feel that the nurse that was coming in to take my place was as qualified as I was, because it took me all this time to learn what I was doing and to do it well. Every one of us has a sense of guilt of leaving the patients behind, and the nurses that we worked with, the docs, the corpsmen, all the members of the team. When a good quarterback on a football team is pulled out and a replacement comes in, it's like starting all over again. So I had this feeling that it just wasn't going to work as well when I left. Also, there was a combination of delusionment versus I did a damn good job. Wait, what the fuck? Also, there was a combination of delusionment versus I did a damn good job. What does that sentence even mean? I don't know. I'm moving on. I felt that 12 months over there was probably one of the most rewarding nursing experiences in my life, that I'll never equal that again. It was incredible coming back, a real changed person, one who was sarcastic and bitter about what was happening in America. The news was lying about the war. Kent State was going on, the feminist movement. The news was lying about the war. Kent State was going on, the feminist movement. Women were burning their bras, and I was in Vietnam saving lives. It was craziness. What was going on here? So my attitude changed, but I felt that my year over there wasn't wasted. I personally felt very satisfied with what I had done. When I started to question the whole involvement in Vietnam, what were we doing over there? Are we trying to change their attitudes? That's when I started getting into trouble. I became immersed in my work at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver, working with psychiatric patients, but I didn't question the politics because I was still in the Army. I couldn't. When I got out of the service, I was working in a hospital in Oakland, California, in intensive care, and they wouldn't let me hang a pint of blood. They made me go through an orientation course to learn CPR. That was sort of the ultimate degradation. My intelligence and my experience were not even addressed properly. It was a real insult to me. I had a real attitude problem working in a civilian hospital. There was this need for the recreation of the push, adrenaline junkies, that we are. The nurses who were in Vietnam, I really meant it. That certain rush of adrenaline, the excitement, there were all casualties coming in that you have got to work. And the adrenaline starts going, so you try to perpetuate that. Nothing meant anything when I came back from Vietnam. The phrase "don't mean nothing" was very descriptive of the way I felt. I found it was getting in my way of jobs when I came back. 12 to 14 jobs in 14 or 15 years, looking for whatever it was that I was looking for. Just really unsettled, going from place to place, never happy. Also, I refused to put down that I was in Vietnam in my applications for my jobs. It didn't mean anything anyway. Why bother trying to explain it to people? Vietnam was very unpopular then. You didn't want to set yourself up as being a Vietnam vet, let alone a woman who had been there. Why cause more trouble? Learn to keep your mouth shut about it. Just do your job. After 13 years at all those jobs in nursing, I decided to go back to school to get a master's degree in counseling. By working in counseling, I'd also get a better look at myself. Just prior to that, I had gone through a depression, a severe depression, so I needed to look at where I was in life. With my job and my career, was I going to be able to maintain it? What was I doing about myself? And after going through the depression and a suicide attempt, my whole life changed to do something for myself. I had joined the Army Reserves about 2 years after I was discharged from the Army. One reason was financial. The pay was pretty good, and then it was one weekend a month. I also found being in the reserves provided camaraderie with other people who had been in Vietnam, and that was important. Then later on, especially this past couple of years, I've used the reserve program as a way of telling people about what to expect if another crisis should occur. I try to alert them to what it is that they're going to be seeing and doing over there, which was never really told to me when I went through my officer's basic training. So it's like they haven't caught on to it yet. I'm sure I'll get in trouble for this one of these days, telling these younger nurses that are in the units now the realities of what war and being a combat nurse is all about. Excuse me. It's not just wearing a pretty uniform and getting a pay for one weekend a month. There are some real serious things they have to think about. So I'm using the reserve unit as a platform to educate those people who are part-time military. I have about another 3 or 4 years before I retire, and I really plan to retire, but I'm also thinking that it probably wouldn't be surprising if they asked me to leave because of the kinds of things that I'm doing inside the reserves. That is not politically correct, to be honest. The tightrope walker, sorry, that could be that could be the title of my chapter. Fuck. It's not politically correct, to be honest. The tightrope walker. Well, that could be the title of my chapter. It wasn't. It was just your name. Adrenaline. Sorry. And it's interesting because I think it relates to that adrenaline junkie idea I was talking about. There's a certain amount of excitement, I guess, in what I'm doing. I'm also real excited and enthusiastic about what I'm doing in the vet center and with the women vets. Because my job has since become doing a lot of training across the country to other to other vet centers and organizations about women vets, I let them know that women are in the military, that women veterans have needs as well as men. People are starting to pick up on the fact that women were in the war and were in combat even though they didn't carry guns. So I'm an activist basically, a social activist for women in the military, especially those who were in Vietnam, because that is closest to me. And I work within the establishment under the umbrella of the Veterans Administration of the federal government, the Army Reserves. So there is this push-pull kind of thing, the tightrope walker. I like that, you know. Sometimes it feels very lonely to me, the work that I'm doing. I wish there were more of me. I wish there were more women working within the system who are as knowledgeable or have as much experience as I do, who would be able to do this kind of work. I'm responsible to the rest of my job here, and other work should go on the side. We gave you permission to start the women's movement in the vet center system, and that's it. No, go back and take care of your vet center. That's not enough for me. And again, I may go into trouble because I'm not saying no to other people as far as the women's issues go. I'll do whatever needs to be done until some changes are made. That may take a long time, but sorry. That may take a long time, but I guess what I'm hoping for is that other people will become active in it and help with it. The more people who get to know about the women who were in Vietnam, the easier my job is going to be. That's why I don't hesitate when screenwriters call or somebody wants to interview me for an article in a newspaper. In one way, I'm tired of being put out there and raked over the coals. But on the other hand, I know that unless I do it, it's not going to be done. The word is out, and I'm willing to talk about it if it's going to help. Not only to help women who need to come in and talk about their lives and help them readjust from their experience, but also to make other people out there, psychologists, therapists, psychiatrics, understand that the war really did a number on all of us, the women as well as the men. That's the end of chapter 1. Next chapter is Linda J. McLennan. Um, yeah, let me know what you guys think of this book. Please write something in the comments, give me a like. Just, I don't know, engage with the video. I'd appreciate that. If you think, if you've never seen me before and you're just looking at me like, who is this guy? Check out my other videos. You know, I'm trying to get the whole YouTube thing going. I just kind of, you know, this is like easy, you know, reading a book. It doesn't take much effort, sure, but I'm just trying to, you know, post stuff. I do songs, covers. Um, you know, I'll do a couple other things. You know, vlogs maybe here and there. But I'm really trying to get this going. So I would appreciate it if you know just engage. Thank you. Have a good night.